Well, good evening, and thank you for tuning in with us tonight. I'm Marcus Harrison Green, journalist, author, and host of In the Meanwhile, coming to you on KVRU, and I have the honor of opening tonight's program. Basketball is not just a game. It is an inheritance passed down from withered playgrounds and creaking high school gyms to the slick hardwood of the pros. Born in Springfield, Massachusetts, yes, but raised everywhere. In back alleys in Brooklyn, in smoke-filled gyms in Chicago, in the alleyways of Manila, on the red earth of Lagos. The ball is a passport. The hoop is a language, and if you can cross over, pull up, and hit a shot, or drop off an assist to a wide-open teammate, well, then you speak it fluently. Cities like New York call themselves the Mecca of basketball. Los Angeles insists that hoops are the birthright, which is why the chosen one came to play there. Chicago speaks in the names of Jordan, Derrick Rose, and the crucible of the blacktop. But there is one city that the national conversation too often overlooks, one whose impact is impossible to erase. That city is ours, Seattle. Because you cannot write the history of basketball without writing about this place, about the Metro League, about Garfield and Franklin, Rainier Beach and O'Day, about gyms that doubled as sanctuaries where working-class kids carved out their dreams against the backdrop of redlining, of school busing, and of a city trying to decide who belonged where. Seattle basketball has always been more than a sport. It has been a mirror. In 1955, Garfield fielded the first racially integrated team to win a state championship, even as much of the city still walled off its neighborhoods. In the 1970s, as Seattle schools began busing black students across town, basketball became both a bridge and a battleground. James Edwards, a Central District kid, was sent north to Roosevelt, where he led the Rough Riders to a state title in 1973. And it was not only the boys, the women of Seattle, Joyce Walker at Garfield, Rhonda Smith at Franklin, Sandy Snyder building dynasties at Lakeside. They were all there long before the WNBA existed, proving that the city's greatness cut across gender. Over the decades, what seemed improbable became inevitable. Seattle producing not just college standouts, but NBA All-Stars and WNBA pioneers, from Doug Christie to Jamal Crawford, from Nate Robinson to Brandon Roy, from Isaiah Thomas to the city's first #1 overall draft pick, Paolo Banchero. 30-plus NBA draft picks from a city that doesn't even crack the top 10 in population. That is not accident. That is culture. That is community. That is Seattle. But here's the truth that anyone who has ever laced up a pair of kicks knows. Most of the kids who step onto those courts will never make it to the pros. The percentages are brutal. Yet the impact of the game, the discipline, the belonging, the love, ripples outward. From the hoop dreams that stretch across the Central District and Rainier Valley to the civic leaders, teachers, musicians, and entrepreneurs once ran those same Metro League floors, the story of Seattle basketball is also the story of Seattle itself. And no one has carried that story with more devotion, more clarity than tonight's presenter. Dr. Daudi Abe is a professor, a writer, and a historian with a PhD in education. For nearly 3 decades, he has explored the intersections of race, culture, gender, and communication in this city and beyond. His book, Emerald Street, traced the history of hip-hop in Seattle. His latest project, Years in the Making, tells the story of Seattle high school basketball with the same care. Daudi has poured his scholarship, his heart, and his memory into making sure this history is preserved, honored, heard. I've had the privilege of walking alongside him in this work, and I can tell you this is a labor of love. A love for the game, for the city, and for the young people who made something extraordinary here. So tonight, settle in, open your ears, open your imagination, and remember that what you're about to hear is not just about basketball. It's about who we are, where we've been, and where we just might go. It is my honor to welcome Dr. Daudi Abe.
Thank you.
Always, sir.
Appreciate you. I appreciate you, Marcus. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. Let me first start off by saying I want to say thank you, and I want to give a shout out to For Culture and for helping to sponsor this event, as well as KVRU, to Crystal and Maurice for hosting me at this event, and I appreciate it more than you know. Very much, very much, very much. So thank you. Thank you for having me. I would also like to introduce, as you've just heard, the one and only Marcus Harrison Green on the introduction, and also providing the live soundtrack, the one and only Vitamin D. Before we start, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge passing of Dr. Quintard Taylor. He was somebody who was a giant in the field of history. The man literally wrote the book on Black Seattle. He was a mentor to me. He was a collaborator. I called him my academic dad. So that loss is great. However, I know that carrying on his legacy with projects like this is something that he looks down on and has a smile on his face. And in fact, we will be seeing some of his work here tonight that will help give us a little bit of context for what we'll be talking about. Okay, so our presentation tonight will be divided into 3 parts. The first part is part 1, early Seattle high school basketball and evolution, years 1896 to 1979. Part 2, the ESPN influence from 1980 to 1999. And part 3, the arrival from 2000 to present. And now we get ready for part 1. Basketball was invented in 1891 by Dr. James Naismith, a Canadian PE teacher at the YMCA in Springfield, Massachusetts. Now, my working theory, is that it spread around the country very quickly. And it was able to spread because there was already a national network of YMCAs that existed. And as basketball was being presented as a sport/activity that could be done in inclement weather, if it's snowing or raining outside, it quickly spread across the country as a new alternative, a new option for people, young people primarily, who wanted to get exercise in an organized team game/sports format, but had to stay inside because of outside weather. And it is this swiftness of spreading around the country that only 5 years later, not only has the sport made it all the way to Seattle, which is literally almost the other tip of the country, not only has it made it to Seattle, but in 1896, we see in the Seattle Times a story about a game between who? Well, let's take a look. We hear in an article about the game, it says the opening contest will be a short match between the teams from the high school and the Ballard Athletic Club. The game was taking place in the Armory, which is at the Seattle Center House. Now, if you notice, it says the high school. At this time, it says that because at this time, Seattle only had one high school. And so it was that high school from that team from that high school that was going to play the Ballard Athletic Club. Now, an interesting thing that we have is the fact that girls were playing high school basketball too. And in an article dated from 1901, there is a preview of not just the Seattle high school girls team, but they are playing the Portland high school girls team. And so we had interstate travel for girls high school basketball in the early 1900s. Now, it wasn't until 1922, the 1922-23 season, that the first boys state tournament was organized. And the winner of that first state tournament was Walla Walla. Walla Walla beating Prosser in that first boys state tournament. So that took place, that tournament was in 1923. It wasn't until 1945 that a Seattle school won state. And that school was Lincoln High School, located in the Wallingford neighborhood. And that's just the beginning. Because as we get, so let's call it the post-World War II era. As we move past World War II, further into the 1940s, toward the later 1940s, one of the first kind of stars to emerge in the Seattle high school basketball scene was Bob Hubriggs. And Bob Hubriggs went to Queen Anne. And after he finishes at Queen Anne, he goes to University of Washington. And what happens with Bob Hubriggs at the University of Washington is that they have a team that has a kid from Garfield on it, and it has a couple other local area kids. And that team at UW becomes the first men's team at the University of Washington to make it to the Final Four in 1953. They lose in that semifinal game to the defending national champion Kansas Jayhawks and their legendary coach Bog Allen. But they win the consolation game and finish third in the nation in 1953. So here you have these high school kids going to UW, these local kids going to UW and putting on for the school, and it makes it to their first Final Four in school history. Now, as we go through this talk and this discussion, you're going to see that it is impossible to separate the social and cultural and political trends that were going on at the time from basketball. And so what we have here is an example of kind of what we would call the turning point for the Black community in Seattle. Quoting from a book called Emerald Street, I understand it's a good read, but the author is a jerk. Quote, "The turning point for Seattle's African-American population can be traced to 1940, when Black people made up about 1% of the city's total population. The start of World War II meant that jobs were available in the defense industries at companies like Boeing. And between 1940 and 1950, the Black population grew from just under 4,000 to nearly 16,000, an increase of 413%. Now, when we talk about war jobs, we're talking about jobs that Black people knew they could be eligible for because there was an executive order that stated that any corporation that was doing business with the government in the war effort could not discriminate in hiring on the basis of race. And so we can see how the population begins to shift. In 1940, as I said, just under 4,000 people, Black people, were living in Seattle. By 1945, around the end of the war, it was estimated around 10,000 were living here. By 1950, just under 16,000. And by 1960, almost 27,000 Black people were calling Seattle home. It's also useful to pay attention to the overall population trends as it was happening at the time. In 1940, the overall population of Seattle was right around 368,000. By the time you get to 1960, that total population is over 550,000. So not only was the Black community experiencing rapid growth, but the city overall was really in a boom time when many thousands of people were moving here over a relatively short time period. Now, one of the things that would go on in these wartime jobs was that people would move somewhere for the job during the war, but then when the war was over, they would move back. Maybe they would move home, or maybe they would move somewhere else. Well, in the case of Seattle, there was encouragement for not only for Black people to stay, but for more Black people to move here. I'm quoting from an article that I wrote with I co-wrote with the one and only Quintard Taylor, and it says, quote, "In fact, by 1951, national Black news publications such as the Chicago Defender called Seattle a, quote, race relations frontier and ranked it as one of the best cities in the nation for African Americans. It urged Eastern Blacks to move there." So if you have, the Chicago Defender is an old school Black publication, and with a platform like that, if they're speaking in such glowing terms about Seattle, that may have an influence on whether or not Black people not only just consider moving to Seattle, but whether they actually do it and follow through. Now, as far as the schools go, we're getting into a time where, as we're talking about the 1950s and 60s, we're getting into a time where there are enough people living here to where there's not just one high school anymore. There are a number of high schools, Garfield being one of them. And so I'm quoting again, quote, "Seattle School District census information from 1962 indicated that Garfield High School had become the first predominantly Black high school in the state. with African-American students making up 51.4% of the student body. Franklin High School, Garfield's closest neighboring high school to the south, was second with 9.2% African-American students. So this is again, we cannot separate the social and cultural from the basketball section, because what this is really saying is that this is because of redlining. Because when Black people moved to Seattle during this time, they were only able to live in the Central District. So naturally, Garfield became populated more and more with these children of these families that were moving to Seattle. So that means that as we're getting through the 50s, that slow buildup is coming across in terms of Garfield's Black population. This shows up in 1955, and there is a headline that says Garfield beats O'Day for state title. This is 1955. My wife and I just went to that same championship game like 3 years ago. So some things never change where Garfield played O'Day. But along with that headline is a picture. And what's interesting about this picture is you see the Garfield team celebrating after their win. But if you look, you also see that this is a mixed race squad. This is an integrated squad. And it is most certainly the first integrated metro team to win state. And in all likelihood, it is probably the first team, period, in the state, the first racially mixed team in the state to win state. And so think about it like this. If you remember the Denzel Washington movie, Remember the Titans, that movie was about a high school in Virginia that had been recently integrated, and there were Black kids and white kids now playing on the same football team. That team, it's a true story, that team goes undefeated, wins the state title, and they made a movie about it. But that movie was set when that story happened in 1971. This happens in 1955. Perhaps somebody needs to make a movie about this particular Garfield High School team. No. Now, as I was saying earlier, the steady increase in the population of the city meant that there were more schools, and more schools needed to be created, more elementary, more middle schools, and more high schools. And so as you get to the end of the 1950s, the Seattle School District sees the need for some organization amongst these schools. And so the idea, at first there was just a city league where only Seattle City schools played. But then the Seattle School District partners with Shoreline School District and the Edmonds School District. And as an article says about this, quote, Shoreline and Ingram both joined with City League schools for the 1959-60 basketball campaign, and the Metro League was born, end quote. I'm going to keep kind of making this point about how you can't separate the two. You can't separate the social from the athletic, at least in this conversation, because by the time you get to the 1960s and into the 70s, you start having the civil rights era. And the civil rights era, at least in Seattle, there were three main issues around civil rights in Seattle. It was employment discrimination, it was housing discrimination, and it was de facto school segregation. Now, in the Washington Constitution, segregated schools are prohibited. However, the fact that Black people were basically only allowed to live in the CD, Garfield almost, and schools like Horace Mann became like 90% Black. And so it was, in fact, a segregated situation. And the idea of city leaders was to bus some of these Black kids up to schools up north in the hopes that they would be getting equal education. And so kids born and raised in the CD, now all of a sudden were being sent to places like Roosevelt. One of these kids was James Edwards. And James Edwards, CD native, ends up going to Roosevelt. His neighborhood school would have been Garfield, but he is bused to Roosevelt. And in 1973, James Edwards leads Roosevelt to a state championship. So here we see an example of Seattle School District busing policy literally changing the course of history as it goes to high school basketball. James Edwards eventually goes to the University of Washington and is then selected, drafted into the NBA. If anybody saw The Last Dance, James Edwards was on that Detroit Pistons Bad Boys team that won back-to-back titles in 89 and 90, I want to say. And he was part of those Piston teams that was beating the crap out of Michael Jordan as he was working his way trying to become a champion. James Edwards also happened to be on the 1996 Chicago Bulls team that beat the Sonics in the finals. Now, if we're talking about players getting more attention in this area, a good example of that would have been Kim Stewart. Kim Stewart, in 1974, Ballard High School senior, was named an All-American. And he went and played in the Capitol Classic in Washington, D.C. Now, the Capitol Classic would eventually become the McDonald's All-American game. And so here we have the first, probably the first high school All-American, at least getting that kind of attention that they did. If we're calling the modern era, my lifetime, which means the 70s, then we're talking about a shift in how Seattle basketball players are viewed by people outside of Seattle. I think people here always understood that there was talent, but now people outside are starting to recognize. Just as a quick historic aside, in an article talking about Kim Stewart being an All-American, there was this sentence, quote, the top vote getter on the 40-player squad was chosen by coaches and sports writers was 6'11" Moses Malone of St. Petersburg, Virginia, who led his team to back-to-back Virginia State championships. Moses Malone would end up being a Hall of Fame. Great player ends up being a Hall of Fame. Now, again, with the overlap, the sociopolitical overlap, I said that the first boys' state tournament had been played in 1923. Well, in 1972, Title IX was passed, and Title IX says, quote, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. This means if you have a boys basketball team, you're going to have a girls basketball team. If you have a boys swim team, you're going to have a girls swim team. If you have a boys state basketball tournament, you're going to have a girls state basketball tournament. And so in 1974, the first girls state basketball tournament was held in Washington. Wapato won that first title. Wapato, Eastern Washington, maybe around Yakima, I believe. However, in the article announcing that Wapato had won that first state tournament, it also noted that Lakeside had come in third place, and that the Garfield girls had come in fourth place. I mentioned just a little bit ago about the increased attention that players were starting to get as we move further into the 1970s. And one example of that in 1975 would have been Clint Richardson. Clint Richardson played at O'Day, and he got offers. An article talking about this notes that Clint Richardson received 300 scholarship offers, which seems crazy, but he was that good. Now, interestingly enough, Clint Richardson, when it was time to go to college, decides to go to Seattle U. And, it's not like Seattle, that may be surprising now to some people, but it's not like Seattle U didn't have history to it. Seattle U made it to the championship game of the NCAA tournament in 1958 with a young man named Elgin Baylor, who would go on to become a Hall of Famer. So Clint Richardson plays at Seattle U. He gets drafted into the NBA, and he, in 1983, Clint Richardson is on the Philadelphia 76ers championship team that wins the NBA title. And also on that team are Dr. J and Moses Malone. This trend keeps going because in 1975 and 1976, you have Cleveland winning back-to-back state championships, and they have a couple of quality players on their team. Cleveland does, and where do they decide to go? They decide to go to Seattle U too. And so now at this time in the mid-70s, Seattle U has this stacked team of all these local players on it. You have Carl Irvin, you have Jawan Oldham, you have Keith Harrell, and Clint Richardson. And Jawan Oldham would go on to be drafted and have a lengthy career in the NBA as well. So as we close out the 1970s, a couple of key coaching hires happened in 1979. One of them is that Al Harrison is hired to coach the Garfield boys. The other is that Sandy Schneider is hired to coach the Lakeside girls. Each of these, Al Harrison and Sandy Schneider, will finish their careers with 5 state championships apiece. Okay, so as we move into the 1980s, a couple of things begin to happen. A couple of trends begin to happen. Well, one is that you have Garfield boys in 1980 winning state, and then you also have the Garfield girls winning state. This is the first time that a Metro League team wins both boys and girls state tournaments in the same year. Okay? Now, playing on that Garfield girls team that year was one Joyce Walker. And Joyce Walker goes from averaging 38 a game in that last state tournament she plays in to going to LSU. Does not go to UW, not go to Seattle U. She goes to LSU. And at LSU, she is a 2-time All-American and is still left there as the all-time leading scorer. Obviously, the opportunities for women playing professional basketball are not near what they are today. And so Joyce Walker plays a little bit overseas, and then she ultimately becomes one of the first women to play for the Harlem Globetrotters. And it is difficult for me to really kind of articulate for younger people the level of popularity that the Harlem Globetrotters enjoyed during the 1980s. But if you think about maybe a decent comparison is like the And One mixtape tour, which was like the 2000s, I think, something like that. That the Globetrotters were going around the country, around the world, really selling out arenas in the way that popular And One mixtape tour was, and it was in the And One mixtape tour. It was about basketball, but it wasn't about it was about the show as much as it was about basketball, and this was certainly the case with the Globetrotters. Now, here we start to see the trend become a little bit more pronounced. So JoJo Buchanan, O'Day, okay, he is a highly sought-after recruit, a national recruit, and he has UW on his list, but when it's time for him to pick a college, he picks Notre Dame. And there's an interesting trend that is revealed out of this. Now, I want to reference this article that came out in like 2006, I want to say, and it's like a Where Are They Now article, and it's about JoJo, okay? Now, here's the key line that I want to quote out of this article. Quote, more commonly referred to as JoJo, Buchanan was the first of Seattle's ESPN-influenced hoop recruits to leave town, eagerly headed for faraway destinations in 1982. It's important to remember that ESPN was launched in 1979. And look, I'm a kid who remembers watching TV when the channel choices were 4, 5, 7, 9, and 11. Okay, so when cable comes out, it's more channels than I had ever imagined before. But not only do you have more channels, but you have specialty channels like ESPN, which is a 24-hour sports network. Now, I remember coming home and watching Big Monday, the games that they would have on Mondays on ESPN. But what it also did was it broadcast these games into the living rooms of people everywhere. But more specifically to this conversation, into the living room of young hoop who now were starting to see themselves, perhaps in the case of Seattle, not starting to see themselves perhaps going somewhere besides Seattle U, or maybe somewhere besides the University of Washington. If you're getting to see Kentucky, if you're getting to see North Carolina, if you're getting to see UCLA, if you're getting to see Notre Dame, if you're getting to see these blue blood programs and you're an elite prospect, the atmosphere, the competition, it's attractive, it's seductive. And so as we move forward from here, for all the elite prospects that are coming out, there will be this tension about what will you do when you graduate? Will you stay here and play, or will you go somewhere else? And that still exists to an extent today. Now, one of the first kind of examples after JoJo becomes Quinn Snyder. Quinn Snyder at Mercer Island finally wins a state title for the legendary coach Ed Pepple, and he is thinking about perhaps going to UW. It was on his list. Okay, he's a McDonald's All-American. Quinn Snyder is the first McDonald's All-American. Like I said, Kim Stewart played in what became the McDonald's All-American game in the 1970s, but Quinn Snyder was the first actual McDonald's All-American to go and play in the game from here. And so as he's thinking about where he's going to go, he makes his choice, and his choice is to go to Duke. And he joins a young Coach K who was just in the infancy of building what would become a Hall of Fame career. And Quinn Snyder was actually kind of rewarded in a way because Duke ends up making it to the Final Four in 1989 when the Final Four was held here in Seattle at the Kingdome. So he had the opportunity to come back as a member of Duke's team playing in the Final Four in Seattle. This tension continues throughout the 1980s. In 1988, you have someone like Doug Christie, who wins the state tournament, leads Rainier Beach to state in 1988, is 2A Player of the Year, I believe, and he decides to go to Pepperdine. You have someone like Bill Ellaby, Garfield, another nationally recruited player. He decides to go to Cal Berkeley. And so that's what I mean about the tension about staying versus going. However, some people did stay. You have Rhonda Smith, now Rhonda Banchero. She went to Franklin. She went to UW. And then she was drafted into the ABL by the Seattle Reign. She played some overseas, and then she eventually becomes the first woman from Seattle drafted into the WNBA. I talked a little bit about, at the end of the 70s, about some significant coaching moves that took place at that time. And perhaps it could be argued, the most consequential coaching move that happened in the 90s was the departure of Francis Williams. Then Francis Williams was the coach who had coached Doug Christie at Beach to that state title. For personal reasons, Francis Williams has to leave his coaching position at Rainier Beach. And who takes over for him? A longtime assistant named Mike Bethea. And Mike Bethea has gone on in the roughly 30 years that he's been coach at Beach. He's gone on to win countless Metro titles, countless district titles, and I believe he's sitting right now at 10 state championships, far and away more than anybody else. So it is not a stretch to say that Mike Bethea is one of, if not the greatest high school coach in state history. The stay or go keeps popping its head up. In the mid-90s, you have someone like Donald Watts. He goes to Lake Washington, the son of the legendary Slick Watts. He goes to Lake Washington. He decides to come to the University of Washington. That list is also on, Dub is also on Jason Terry of Franklin's list. Jason Terry wins back-to-back state championships at Franklin, but then he decides to go to Arizona. You can't really argue with the results of that decision because Jason Terry wins a national championship at Arizona in 1997. He's the National College Player of the Year in 1999. And in 2011, he wins a world championship in the NBA with the Dallas Mavericks as they defeat LeBron James and the Miami Heat. This means that Jason Terry has achieved the elusive championship trifecta, where he is a state champion, he is a national champion, and he's a world champion. Now, AAU has been around for some time, but in the 90s, it really starts to kind of coalesce, primarily around a couple of programs in particular. One of them is Friends of Hoop, founded by then Supersonics head coach George Karl, with his own money, I might add. And he, even after he is fired by the Sonics, he continues to fund Friends of Hoop. And in doing this, George Karl was really continuing a legacy of Sonics coaches engaging with the local high school community. That goes all the way back to Bill Russell when he was coaching the Sonics. Then you had Lenny Wilkins. And then you had people like Bernie Bickerstaff. So Sonics coaches engaging the local high school community was not something that was new. And so the level of talent that has come through Friends of Hoop has been amazing, and it's been going strong for the last 30 plus years. And on the other end, you have the creation of what is probably one of the best on the West Coast, probably in the discussion for one of the top AAU programs in the country. And this happens when Seattle-style basketball academy combines with the Rotary Boys and Girls Club. And what you end up with is Rotary style. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Massive Monkeys origin story. Massive Monkeys are a Beacon Hill-based breaking crew who have won not one, but 2 world breaking championships. And up on at the Jefferson Community Center, you would have, there were 2 crew. One was Massive Crew, and the other were the Incredible Style Monkeys. And when these 2 crews came together, they became Massive Monkeys. And so that story just kind of reminds me of how Rotary Style came about, founded by Dan Finkley and Daryl Henry. And they have put so much, the amount of talent that has gone through Rotary is truly impressive, truly impressive. And an article about Rotary, it talks about the Seattle to NBA pipeline. As you get to the end of the 90s, the whole question of stay versus go still remains. You have Jamal Crawford. He leads Beach to state in 1998. And then as a senior in 1999, there's the question. What is he going to do? Where is he going to go? He decides to go to Michigan. He plays there for 1 year, his freshman year, declares for the NBA draft and is drafted 8th overall. He becomes 6th man of the year. He wins that award 3 times. And I think there should be something said with regard to the style that he brought to the game. Jamal Crawford is universally loved in the basketball community. It's not just because he's a great guy or great player. It's the charisma with which he played the game and the obvious love that he showed for that game. And again, it's difficult to argue with him going to Michigan because this has all turned out great for him. In fact, he's even fashioned himself a very nice broadcasting career where, as NBC has regained the rights to broadcast NBA games, they have brought on Jamal Crawford as one of their color analysts. So as we close out the 1990s, again, we have the overlap between the social and the athletic. And in this case, it's the 1998 creation of the King Holiday Hoop Fest. And this was played, it was played both at SPU and at Heck Ed at UW. And what this really does is it starts off where it's the top teams that play on Martin Luther King Day, the top teams in the city. Then it starts to be the top teams in the state. Then they start to bring in top teams from around the country because my sense is that people in other places started to realize that if you really wanted to test yourself, Seattle was a good place to go. The top teams in Seattle, you know what I'm saying, it wasn't going to be no pushover. And so that sense of competition, I feel like, really came out in terms of the kinds of teams that were coming to participate in the MLK Hoop Fest. And lastly, I think I would say that it's only appropriate for a tournament like that, a hoop fest like that, to be played in the only county in the United States that is named after Martin Luther King. So now as we get into the 2000s, during this time, Seattle high school basketball starts to enter the local and national consciousness in a variety of ways, not always in Metro League gyms. And one example would be the number of McDonald's All-Americans. In the early to mid-2000s, there was a plethora of McDonald's All-Americans that came through. One example would be Luke Ridnour. Now, Luke Ridnour went to Blaine. I understand Blaine is not Seattle, but it's the region, okay? You have someone like Aaron Brooks, who went to Franklin. Someone like Marvin Williams from Bremerton. Someone like Martell Webster, Seattle Prep. John Brockman, Snohomish. Kirsten Thompson, Monroe. Micah Downs, Juanita, and Spencer Hawes, Seattle Prep. Now, out of all those people I named, Spencer Hawes, Kirsten Thompson, and John Brockman went to UW. The rest went to either Oregon, Marvin Williams went to North Carolina. Martell Webster was going to go to UW, but he didn't. He had a great McDonald's All-American game and was all of a sudden like, okay, I think I'll put my name in the draft. This was during a time when you could go straight from high school to the draft. You didn't have to spend that 1 year in college. Another way that that Seattle basketball kind of was imprinted on the consciousness was the 2004 documentary, The Heart of the Game. This film followed the run of the Roosevelt girls team to the state championship in 2004. And in that state championship game, they beat a Joyce Walker coached Garfield girls team. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the next year, Coach Walker got her team back to the state championship and this time won. In doing this, she became the first person to, as a player, lead her team to a state championship and then also do the same as a coach at the same school. I talked a little bit earlier about the stay versus go, where here was a big deal stay. In 2005, the Washington men's basketball team had a number of Seattle players: Brandon Roy, Nate Robinson, Will Conroy, Trey Simmons. And what they were able to do were a couple of firsts. They were able to become the first Washington men's team to win the Pac-10 tournament. And they also became the first UW men's team to earn a number one seed in the NCAA tournament. And in this way, they were similar to that 1953 team that had Bob Hubriggs on it that I talked about earlier. This collection of local kids who were able to come together and do something that had never been done at these schools. And this was made possible by the fact that so many of these kids that I just named there had opportunities to go other places, but were determined to stay here and put on for the town. Now, I talked a little bit earlier about Martell Webster and how after he had that great McDonald's All-American game, he decided to go straight to the draft. Well, he does do this. He goes to the draft, and in the 2005 draft, okay, Martell Webster is selected number 6 overall by the Portland Trailblazers. But also, drafted number 2 that year was Marvin Williams. He had spent a year at North Carolina. He graduated from Bremerton. So what that meant was in the 2005 draft, Seattle area players went in the top 6. Now, one important thing to think about, especially as we move into this time period, into the 2000s, is the ways in which new technology began to play a role in how local sports were covered. And the example that we have here is the website hoopgirls.com, girls, GURLZ.com. And this is started by Glenn Nelson. He's an award-winning sports writer for the Seattle Times at one point. And he saw a niche that needed filling. There was plenty of coverage around boys high school basketball, who the elite players were, where they were thinking of going, who was recruiting them, but there was very little, if any, of that for girls. And so Glenn Nelson, in creating this site, saw a need for that same coverage of who are the elite girls players, who is recruiting them, where are they thinking about going. And this became enough of a thing to where in 2008, ESPN purchases the site from Glenn Nelson. Another example that wasn't necessarily in Seattle basketball per se, but involved a Seattle basketball person would have been Tony Roten in 2010. And he was a part of the U17 team that won the gold medal at the FIBA World Championships. Quote from Tony Roten, fairly excited at having won the gold medal. He says, quote, "I'm going to hang it up somewhere in my room, but I'm wearing it all day and I'm not taking it off. I'm getting on the plane with it. When we land in my city, I'll be wearing it. I might sleep wearing it. Another example is Ed Pepple, legendary Mercer Island coach. And in 2012, Ed Pepple is awarded the Morgan Wooten Award for Lifetime Achievement in high school basketball. And this is awarded by the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. Each year, one boys coach wins it and one girls coach wins it. And in this particular year, Ed Pepple was the boys coach who won. So even when you have historic elements, let's say, of a story like the UW women, we have a local tie to it. So in 2016, the Husky women became the first team in state history to reach the women's Final Four. Now, that team was led by Kelsey Plum, who, when she was finished, was the all-time Division I leading scorer. However, another crucial player on that run to the Final Four was Talia Walton. Talia Walton was from Federal Way. She playing for the Huskies in that Final Four. She was the Robin to Kelsey Plum's Batman, and she herself gets drafted into the WNBA by the Los Angeles Sparks. Okay, here's something that happens on the court that kind of that plays into what I'm talking about with the national consciousness. In 2015, Chief Sealth is playing a game against Garfield. And Chief Sealth has the ball under their basket, the basket they're trying to score at. And the inbounds play, a lob is thrown to Hafid Yassin. And Yassin, he jumps high, obviously, but he's kind of buoyed up and jostled to where he gets up even higher in the air. And they're saying chin over the rim as he catches this alley-oop and dunks it. Now, that in itself would have been an amazing play. I'm sure you can Google it, you can find it. That in itself would have been an amazing play. However, to add on to that play that night was the number one play on the SportsCenter Top 10 countdown. Okay. So now, the previously mentioned Brandon Roy, he has finished playing his professional career and he is coming back to coach. And in 2016, he accepts the boys' job, head coaching job at Nathan Hale. This coincides with the arrival of the Porter family. And Michael Porter Jr. is the top-ranked, he's coming in to be a senior. He is the top-ranked senior in his class. And he enrolls at Notre Dame, and he and Brandon Roy have this kind of dynamic duo combination of coach and star player. Now, usually during the winter holidays, the school break, the winter vacation, often top high school teams will travel around the country and play in these holiday tournaments against some of the other teams from different parts of the country. Well, in the aftermath of that, on those trips, Nathan Hale had beaten Oak Hill. If anybody knows anything about power high schools and prep programs, you know Oak Hill. Oak Hill's put a gang of people in the league, okay? And they also beat Sierra Canyon. Sierra Canyon is another high-profile program in Los Angeles. You may remember that LeBron James Jr. recently went there. So by the time all that takes place, Nathan Hale is ranked as the consensus number one team in the country, not in the state, in the country. Nathan Hale goes on to win the state championship. Michael Porter Jr. is named State Player of the Year. He's named Most Outstanding Player of the State Tournament. And he wins MVP of the McDonald's All-American game. Possibly one of the most distinguished players ever to come out of Seattle. And I've actually heard some people argue that this Nathan Hale team they finished the season undefeated, may be the greatest high school team, boys high school team in state history. I'm not saying it is, but they certainly have an argument. Usually when that discussion is had, one of the other teams that's brought up are a team known as the Super Dogs, who are an undefeated Garfield team in the 1970s. But it's an interesting discussion to have. In the aftermath of Nathan Hale's ultimate triumph, Brandon Roy leaves the coaching position at Nathan Hale and goes to Garfield. And he wins a couple more state championships at Garfield and seemed poised to do more of the same when suddenly within the last week or two, he was fired with a fairly vague explanation. And certainly people in the community have had questions. And certainly I myself, as a graduate of Garfield, am interested in learning more about that situation. Not only was Brandon Roy fired as the coach of the boys team, but Roydell Smiley, another Garfield alum who has connections to the community, was also fired as coach of the girls team. So we will see what happens with that. Now, when we're talking about recognition for this area, it goes beyond simply people, because, people that live here, they're homers, we have a little bit of a slanted view. But then when it comes to people who have impressive basketball resumes who are saying something about this place, that hits a little bit different because it's validation, okay? Now, PJ Carlesimo was broadcasting a University of Washington men's game on TV, offering color analysis. And during that broadcast, he said, quote, "The Metro League in Seattle is the best high school league in America," end quote. Now, it is different in this sense. It's the only high school league in America that has public schools, private schools, and religious schools. No other high school league in America has all of those things. And it's difficult to quantify whether it is or not, whether it's the best or not, but we must remember who's saying this. PJ Carlesimo, his basketball resume is fantastic. He coached Seton Hall to the national championship game in the 1989 Final Four that was held at the Kingdome here in Seattle. He was an assistant on the original Dream Team, the 1992 Olympic team in Barcelona. He was an assistant on that team. And he coached multiple NBA teams. He coached the Golden State Warriors. He coached the Sonics. And so this is not somebody who is just shooting off the hip. This is somebody who knows, who has spent his lifetime evaluating basketball talent. Interestingly enough, a mere 6 months later, this take by PJ was validated because in the 2022 NBA draft, we have 3 Metro League players go in the first round. Paolo Banchero goes number 1 overall. Tari Eason from Garfield goes number 17. And Marjan Beauchamp, I believe he played both at Garfield and Rainier Beach. He goes number 24. And so this is, like I said, this is a bit of validation for people who were scoffing at PJ Carlesimo when he said what he said. That next NBA draft really gave validation. And it's not just players. As we get ready to go into the 25-26 NBA season, 10% of NBA head coaches are Seattle basketball guys. Doug Christie at Sacramento went to Rainier Beach. Mitch Johnson at San Antonio went to O'Day. Quinn Snyder at Atlanta went to Mercer Island. And it's not even pro coaches. Mercer Island's own Travis DeCure just became the all-time winningest coach at Montana. While the NBA stuff is great, the glitz, the glamour, the money, the fame, the attention, I love how it brings shine to our city. And what this whole story really is about is community. One of the ways that community plays out would be the crossover. And this is Jamal Crawford's Pro-Am Summer League, played out at the gym at SPU. For years now, he has been bringing basketball royalty into town. People like Kevin Durant, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James. And it allows the community, allows people in the stands to see and interact with these players in a way that is less sterile than an NBA game might be. NBA games are very slick and rehearsed and very production value and all this kind of thing. Here, you are amongst community. At the crossover, you are amongst community. And it not only that, it allows high school students to get on the court with some of these guys that they only see on television and measure themselves, see how good they really are. And that kind of interaction, that kind of community matters when it comes to developing and as it works with the maturation, as it kind of goes hand in hand with the maturation of the AAU programs here in the city, not just Friends of Hoop or Rotary, but others like Emerald City and others that really serve to allow for skill development and identifying top talent that comes out of here. I talked a little bit about Hoop Girl and this new form of media. Well, you also have people like Bill Ellaby, also known as the Guru, and he's known as the Guru because of his exhaustive scouting and reporting that he does. He has preseason predictions for first, second team, all-Metro defensive team, player of the year. He has postseason awards that he gives out. He refs all kinds of games in these summer league tournaments. And so he is, like I said, this new age community grassroots type of media. And with him, you have someone like Proof in the Play. And Proof he is the go-to documentary as far as photos and video go of not just high school sports, but youth sports in general. And the platforms that they are able to create for themselves means that they don't need to wait for the Seattle Times, the Seattle PI to come and decide who to cover when. They are more community driven. They are more grassroots driven. If they are at a game and they see a kid who looks outstanding, they're going to go interview him immediately. They're going to start getting that kid's name out there immediately. And so the freedom that comes with building your own platform, again, with the advancements of tech and being able to build your own platforms, really makes a difference in how we are now able to consume high school basketball in this area. If I'm talking about community, I would be remiss if I did not mention my son Dana, who played for O'Day, and my daughter Layla, who played for Bush. I love you both. And finally, there has been a bit of focus on, like I said, the professional and the collegiate. But again, I go back to what this story is really about, is community. And you have people who have walked the Seattle high school basketball path, and it has led them to do many different things. You have someone like former Governor Jay Inslee. You have someone like the owner of Fats Chicken and Waffle, Erica White. You have someone like Grammy Award-winning musician and rapper Ishmael Butler. And you have someone like Seattle City Councilwoman Joy Hollingsworth. And it's these and many other folks doing the work every day and building up the fabric that makes our community as vibrant as it is. I want to say thank you very much to everyone who was listening, everyone who tuned in. I want to thank For Culture. I want to thank KVRU. I want to thank Crystal. I want to thank Maurice. I want to thank my wife, Danielle. And I want to thank the one and only Marcus Harrison Green, and also the incomparable Vitamin D. I appreciate y'all. Good night, y'all. Peace.